Hi, this is Sumaya Kamani and Hilary LeBlanc, and you're listening to Off the Rack, where we explore the evolution of fashion, its history, trends, and the stories shaping its future.
We acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples.
This week, we'll be speaking with Angela DeMontigny. Angela is an award winning designer, artist, entrepreneur, and mentor of the Métis heritage, who has been a pioneer of the Indigenous luxury movement for over 2 decades and is based in Hamilton. Through the creation of her beautiful, authentic Indigenous fashion, accessories, lifestyle, and wellness products, the Lord Soy Candles, under her label DeMontigny, she has not only been a trailblazer for Indigenous Canadian fashion, nationally and internationally, but is an example of reclaiming her identity as an Indigenous woman by utilizing her gifts as a designer and entrepreneur. So, welcome, Angela. So excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm so
We're-
happy to be here.
We're so excited to have you. Starting off our first episode with our first guest, we were wondering if you could first share some of the insights into the evolution of Indigenous fashion in Canada and some of its cultural significance, as we are not part of that community and would love to learn more about it.
Well, I'm one of a few sort of, I don't even like to use the word pioneer because it's kind of a colonial term. Trailblazer is a better word, actually, of Indigenous fashion in this country. And my predecessors who, were really inspirational for me, Dorothy Grant from the West Coast, Darcy Moses, who's from the interior, they were they were real groundbreaking designers in the sense that they were starting to really focus on Indigenous culture in fashion. And I saw what they were doing, and I realized it was something that was missing in fashion in general, and a way to really take back our heritage and our culture, celebrate it. For me, it's honoring my ancestors who, my dad and my grandmas who, did not feel safe or proud of being Indigenous. And so it was reclaiming that. And so it's been a powerful thing to do. And my hope was that, in the future, there would be an actual Indigenous fashion industry. And, we are well on our way to having one. So it's been a long journey, but, being able to see it happen has been really, truly exciting.
Absolutely. And also tell us about your brand. Like, what is it about and how does it signify the Indigenous fashion?
Well, I always came from it from a very contemporary perspective because that's something that I saw was not happening in fashion from an Indigenous cultural perspective. And my love has always been high fashion. And, my whole point and purpose was to change people's perspectives of what they thought contemporary Indigenous people were about, to change stereotypes, to change how people viewed us, and our clothing, because not only in Canada or North America, Turtle Island, or around the world, people have such a lack of knowledge about us as Indigenous people, especially, we're kind of stuck in the past as far as how they view us, especially outside of this continent. They really think that we still live in teepees and we still, ride horseback and, dress in full buckskin and all, like, honestly. So changing that sort of romantic idea of who we were and like this is who we are now, it was a huge game changer.
That's amazing. I love the sound of it. So, what do you think were the challenges along the way? Just the challenges, opportunities to doing that fashion and bringing that fashion to the forefront in the face of the Canadian fashion industry.
There were many challenges, and there still are. So many people, did not know what Indigenous fashion was. They
Mhm.
equated what we did to, for some reason, as things that you would clothing regalia that we wore at powwows, things that were costume that weren't particularly well made or always with beads and feathers, and you
Yeah.
know, they had no concept of, us being able to create actual fashion that you could wear, every day. So that lack of respect and a lot of racism in regards to that. The fashion industry is an elitist industry. It's very European focused. It's even to this day, we're still fighting that in the sense, with cultural appropriation. A European designer or a design house, it's quite fine for them to, take our designs or our cultural symbols and what makes up Indigenous culture and use it in their collections, and to be celebrated, and they make thousands without any recognition or anything coming back to the communities or the nation that they're taking that inspiration from. And I'm not even going to say inspiration, stealing, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And yet when an Indigenous designer does something, it's not celebrated, it's not newsworthy. So we're still kind of fighting that in a sense. It's like, it's fine to copy what we do, but not if we're doing it ourselves to elevate that. So that's something that I'm still striving to see that change.
Absolutely, of course. And you touched on a couple of things that I really want to ask in the next question as well, because we've touched on cultural appropriation, it's the intentions behind some of the designs, et cetera. And I'm really curious how the industry can better support and promote Indigenous voices, and how we can better come together, whether that's policy, funding. Like, I'm sure there's so many different answers, but I'm really interested, especially when it comes to changing the ideals around fashion on top of just what support might generally look like.
So what we have just recently seen was a collaboration with Ralph Lauren and oh my gosh, I can't remember her name right now, a beautiful Navajo designer and artist, and incorporated her designs into a collection that they did, which I have to say was beautifully done. Then really recently, and won't call it a collaboration, but there was a partnership with, Louis Vuitton and Lauren Goodday, and oh my gosh, it was the worst. So this is how you don't do it, using Indigenous artists mostly. They don't want to have any competition happening. It's really what it is. It's like, how can we say that we are, acknowledging and being able to use these designs in our collections that we are only going to benefit from, and we're not even going to mention your name. Like, that is not okay. And the fact that that is still happening is kind of mind-blowing, actually. So what needs to happen is true collaborations with other Indigenous designers, not just artists where you can just use their artwork and put it on your garments so that you can make all the money. It's, how about you support and work as a team with another Indigenous designer so that everybody is benefiting. That is what needs to happen.
100%. I saw the styles that you were mentioning, and I saw them getting a lot of praise. And then I saw people that were present talking about the fact that, the Indigenous musicians that were performing were sort of hidden off in a corner, and just poor decorum, it seemed, across the board in terms of what collaboration should look like and could look like, especially from a top tier brand. And I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but also, like, when you've named a man of color who's prominent as your creative collaborator in Pharrell, and you'd think a minority would champion a minority, and then you see this and you're like, where did we all go so wrong? So it was definitely rough. Absolutely. Want to follow up and ask you something that I know you know a little bit of my perspective and the perspective that I'm coming from in this interview, but I'm very curious about the history of Indigenous style and fashion and functionality, and how it's informed Canadian North American style, because my personal perspective is seeing Indigenous fashion as the root of sustainability, but also the root of function when we talk about furs and the purpose that comes behind those clothes. And then you see where clothes stand today, and I would assume so much of this has been informed from where this Canada has started. So I'm very curious to your take on that.
Okay. So in the early days of my career, I did many, many shows in the States. I did Denver and Chicago and Dallas, Texas, and Wyoming, and all throughout the Midwest, Southwest. And because Indigenous fashion wasn't a thing yet, and because I was working predominantly in leather, people threw me in the Western wear category. Where do you think fringe came from? The entire Western wear industry has appropriated Indigenous fashion. So really, it has influenced fashion in North America since the first Europeans settled here. And we don't get recognition for that, right? I mean, the voyageurs, like everyone, they all start because of the functionality. Fringe is something that is functional. Everything that we made or still make has a purpose. But because we're artistic, we always made everyday items beautiful and a way to identify ourselves and the nations that we came from and the geographical landscape that we came from. So, we used all of that beautiful art and quill work and everything to identify us as nations and people. So all of that has been completely appropriated since the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even before the Confederation of Canada, the most important product that we had was fur and that kind of products. We had the highest imports in that category, and that's how this fashion had its first kickstart, I think. And it's interesting where it is right now. And I think with that, what do you think, or how do you employ your traditional Indigenous style or teachings into the modern garments you make today? How do you bring that back?
A lot of, when I was doing a lot of sort of leathers and sort of even wedding dresses and gowns and things that were a little more one of a kind, I always utilized traditional beadwork, but done in a contemporary way. So it's floral beadwork, woodland floral style, which is definitely part of my Métis heritage. I just automatically beaded those kinds of flowers and things, but I did them in I used colors that were very elegant and very elegant styles of clothing to put them on. So I'm like moving our ancestors with us into the future is how I perceive it.
Yeah, and even like with other challenges like sustainability or like technological advancements and all, how do you think we need to keep up with those things while also keeping in mind the Indigenous fashion, like also keeping it in the forefront while also tackling other challenges?
So one of the things that I firmly believe in is that Indigenous designers should be leading the world in sustainable fashion practices. And that means utilizing natural materials. That's something that I have always done throughout my career. So whether it was leather or silk or linen, things that lasted, that made you feel good, that were made and really, I think, especially when you look at the world of polyester that is like ruining our planet, literally. It's not a material that I've ever enjoyed wearing, and because it's predominantly the one fabric that seems to be really taking over the world, and it's very hard to find natural materials. That I think that we need to really focus and go in that direction and lead the way in doing things differently. So that's my personal opinion. It's like, as Indigenous people, it's our responsibility to take care of the planet. And so anything that we are doing, even in our businesses and our lives, should be in alignment with that.
I couldn't agree more.
Absolutely. You did sort of answer the next question that I wanted to ask you indirectly, but I was going to ask if you could extrapolate on what, I guess, like teachings and methods make Indigenous fashion and or clothing? Because I think we're talking about Indigenous fashion is in the way we see fashion today, right, as something maybe more stylish or at least modernized. But I also think of fashion as just the clothes for function or what you would wear. I'm curious what would make Indigenous clothing and fashion just inherently sustainable, because of my biased belief that this is the way to save the world personally, is through Indigenous fashion.
Well, sustainability has a lot of different areas that it covers, right? So when I look at, how I've designed over the decades, it's always been about slow fashion, right? So it's not making hundreds and thousands of units of something. That's one of the reasons actually I loved working with hides and leathers and fur, because you can only cut one at a time. And so, it forces you to slow down. Every hide is different, which means that every garment that you're making is going to be slightly different. I love that. It's not mass made. And so, and especially when you have people who are doing, beautiful embellishments like beadwork or quill work or moose hair tufting, things like that. They're special, and so then they become heirlooms, and so then they can be passed down through generations. To me, that is sustainability.
Yeah, true. And I think we've spoken about where it came from, how it started, and where we are. But what do you think is the future of Indigenous fashion? Where do you think we're going, and what is lacking?
Well, I think where it's going is that we are now starting to move into the world of um, not mass production per se, but there are those possibilities, and I'm a little worried that some designers will start becoming part of the problem that we're faced with right now, as the industry is still dealing with fast fashion, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down as much as it needs to, just because it's taken us so long to be able to get a foot in the door, so to speak. But then that doesn't mean that that's the direction that we should be going. I think we need to kind of pull it back a little bit and see how do we do this differently so that we can show an alternative, right? So we can still have sustainable businesses. So what I'm hoping, and what I would like to see happen, is where we have the ability to have small production. It's very difficult in Canada because we don't make anything here anymore. So production for fashion is, literally non-existent now. So that has become a problem, because then people have to go somewhere else. They have to go to Asia, or, the States, or maybe Mexico is actually a good option, because we're still, dealing with our relatives, so to speak. But having the ability to print, have our own textile printing on natural fabrics so that we can have control over that. I think that's the way of the future. I think we have an exciting future, honestly, because Indigenous fashion can be anything, because we're the ones making it. So we can be super futuristic and still, take our own designs and ideas and move them into the future, which makes them completely authentic and different from anything else.
I love it. It's very refreshing to hear that there's a positive outcome or something we could foresee.
Absolutely. I thought that was a wonderful answer, and it does make me very excited for the future of all fashion and Indigenous fashion. Before we wrap up this episode, I do want to ask you, like, if you're a normal person, hopefully you're listening to this episode and just wanting to know how best to participate. We've touched on cultural appropriation, we've touched on slow fashion, we've touched on proper collaboration and support. What should consumers take from this episode and take into consideration moving forward, and how best can they support Indigenous communities, or even spread awareness to what amazing Indigenous fashion and culture is out there, from their own perspectives?
Well, I think if people watching this can, do a little bit of their own research, especially online or Instagram, and, seek out Indigenous fashion designers. We're getting out there a lot more than in the past, which is really exciting. And especially in the world of accessories and jewelry, it's really blown up, and it's so amazing to see that. So just, it's still difficult unless you're purchasing online to be able to access the products. So I do want to do a little plug because I'm excited about this.
You should.
There's going to be the very first Indigenous Fashion Week in the US happening this May in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I'm super excited to say that I am working on a collaboration with two other designers, Jason Berg from IMAC and Rochelle Whitewind, who I've known for decades as well. So we're working together on something I'm really, really excited about. So.
That's amazing.
Cool.
Well, you'll have to send it in so that we can amplify over on FGI's platforms and on our respective platforms, because that is extremely exciting to hear. And congratulations, of course. I had heard about the Santa Fe show at the Textile Museum when we saw each other, and so that's very exciting to hear.
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for being our first ever inaugural guest on this podcast. It's been so amazing talking to you and hearing about all the wonderful work that you're doing, and hearing about this history and culture from a perspective that we simply do not have and cannot share without somebody like you. I am going to put you on the spot for another plug. If anyone wants to learn more about you, about your amazing work, and to see this upcoming collection, where should they go?
Right now, I guess the best place is on Instagram. So to just follow my account at Angela DeMontigny. And my other business is in the Indigenous Wellness Lodge Soy Candles as well.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you so much for joining us today, Angela. I'm sure along with us, our viewers also got a lot to learn from you today. And to everyone else, to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe for the next in the series. Leave a comment and share with others.
Amazing. And to everyone listening, stay fabulous.